Did you ever walk into a room and feel like your entire life just got deleted with a single PDF? Madison Clark stood frozen just inside the glass doors of the 24th floor at Titan Axis, the Seattle skyline blazing silver behind her like a taunt. The air smelled of bergamot diffusers and expensive carpet, but to her, it smelled like endings. She tried to swallow, but her throat felt like concrete. Only hours earlier, she'd powered through code reviews, her mind wired on dark roast and the thrill of making things work. She'd been the one who'd written half the deployment scripts Titan Axis ran on the hidden scaffolding nobody saw but everybody depended on. Now, her badge beeped red instead of green at the security scanner. A woman from reception, whose name Madison couldn't even remember because Titan churned through people like an assembly line, glanced up with polite pity. "I'm sorry, Ms. Clark. I think you're supposed to report to E314. E314. That room didn't even exist on the office map Madison had memorized like gospel. She forced her legs to move, her boots echoing across a corridor that used to buzz with life chatter about push requests, bickering over coffee beans, the sound of humans creating things that mattered. Now, it felt like a hospital hallway waiting to swallow her whole. Titan Axis was once a miracle in progress, a ragtag group of dreamers pounding keyboards in a Belltown garage that smelled of soldering iron and burnt pizza. Madison had been there since the early days, breathing in ambition so fierce it left scorch marks. Back then, their CTO used to say, "Build the future or get run over by it." She'd believed him. She'd believed all of them. Now, the company she'd poured her 20s and half her 30s into had just been devoured by Orion Holdings, a corporate behemoth with enough money to buy a state and the personality of an ice cube. Everyone at Titan Axis called it a merger. But Madison knew better. A merger was two rivers joining forces. This was a python swallowing a rabbit, slow and methodical, until nothing remained but the python's grin. She passed a wall where Titan's mission statement, "Innovation with integrity," had been replaced by an Orion poster screaming, "One Orion, one future." It felt like a funeral banner. Inside the open workspace, people Madison once laughed with at launch parties sat hunched over keyboards, faces pale in the blue glow of monitors. The sound of typing was the only pulse left. No jokes, no memes, no "let's grab drinks after this deploy." New faces moved among them, wearing lanyards that seemed to sparkle like weapons. She recognized none of them. The Orion employees carried sleek tablets, eyes scanning the floor as if they were already measuring where to put new furniture and which old bodies to remove. Someone said synergies in a hushed tone, and Madison's stomach flipped. Synergy, the corporate code word for layoffs. She reached her old workstation, or what was left of it. Her dual monitors were gone. In their place sat a loaner laptop, still tagged with a bright sticker, "Property of Orion Holdings, IT asset, J90851. It looked sterile, alien. Next to it lay a folder marked in block letters, "Integration Packet." She didn't dare open it. Instead, she stared out over the office. Once, these desks were cluttered with half-empty Red Bull cans, prototype hardware, and inside, jokes scribbled on sticky notes. Now, they were cleared off like crime scenes, wiped of fingerprints and personality. She blinked hard, refusing to let tears come. A few feet away, two guys in matching Orion vests whispered, eyes flicking toward her. She wondered which slide her name appeared on, probably under redundant roles. A voice crackled over the intercom. "Madison Clark, please proceed to E314 immediately." Her chest tightened. She picked up the integration packet like it might explode and walked toward a room she'd never known existed, knowing that whatever waited inside wasn't just the end of her job. It might be the erasure of her entire story. Madison's hand hesitated on the door handle of E314, her palms slick with sweat. She half expected a retinal scanner or some futuristic voice prompt demanding a passcode. Instead, the door gave way under her push, swinging open with a cold, hydraulic hush. Inside, the temperature dropped 10 degrees. The room was small, barely big enough for a table and 3 chairs. Frosty air poured from ceiling vents, like a hidden glacier was melting above them. The walls were matte gray, bare except for a mounted Orion Holdings logo that glinted under LED lights. 2 people sat waiting. One was a man in a tailored navy suit, crisp white shirt, silver cufflinks that probably cost more than Madison's monthly rent. His nameplate set perfectly in front of him read, Daniel Pierce, Senior Vice President of Corporate Realignment. Next to him, a woman sat poised, a surface-level smile frozen on her lips. Her hair was pinned straight, her blouse a soft shade of ivory that screamed corporate approachable. A thin folder rested in front of her, marked with Madison's name in heavy black ink. Madison Clark, Daniel said, standing halfway, then deciding against a handshake like he'd remembered germs existed. Please, have a seat. Madison pulled out the chair opposite them, careful to scrape it loudly along the floor, a tiny rebellion. She dropped the integration packet on the table like a gauntlet. Daniel folded his hands, leaning forward as though preparing to deliver good news. His voice was silky, each syllable practiced like a script. Madison, first, I want to acknowledge how much we value the contributions you've made to Titan Axis. Madison said nothing. Daniel continued, Undeterred, you've been an integral part of the engineering team's journey, and your tenure has not gone unnoticed. However, as part of our ongoing efforts to synergize operational capabilities and eliminate redundant verticals, she felt her jaw tighten. Daniel paused, as if waiting for her to nod. She didn't. He pressed on. We've conducted a comprehensive talent deployment analysis. Unfortunately, it has been determined that your current role as senior platform engineer overlaps significantly with existing Orion infrastructure personnel. As a result, your position has been designated as redundant. Madison blinked. Once, slowly. I'm redundant. Her voice sliced the silence like glass. Daniel shifted, glancing at the woman beside him as though seeking backup. The woman jumped in smoothly, her voice the verbal equivalent of a firm, cold handshake. My name is Rebecca Klein. I'm with HR at Orion Holdings. I'll be assisting you through this transition process. We understand how challenging this may feel, but please know we're committed to supporting you. Madison narrowed her eyes. Rebecca continued, You're being offered a severance package equivalent to 2 weeks' base salary, along with continuation of medical benefits for 30 days. We'll also require your signature on our standard non-disparagement agreement and a release of any further claims against Orion Holdings or its subsidiaries. Madison let out a laugh, short, sharp, almost bitter. 2 weeks for 14 years of work. Daniel opened his mouth, but she cut him off. Tell me, Daniel, do you even know what I do here? He hesitated, a tiny flicker in his eyes. I'm aware of your role in cross-platform deployments. Which ones, she demanded. Daniel cleared his throat. Rebecca stepped in again. Professional calm layered over discomfort. Madison, I assure you this decision was made holistically, in alignment with our synergy goals across all verticals. Madison leaned forward, hands braced on the table. Stop saying synergy like it's holy scripture. You're just erasing people and calling it optimization. Rebecca's face twitched. Daniel spoke quickly, trying to regain control. We're prepared to offer you $40,000 as a gesture of goodwill, above the standard severance. Provided, of course, you sign the release. Madison sat back, crossing her arms, voice lowering to a dangerous calm. $40,000. To disappear quietly. Rebecca tried to soften the blow. We truly value the Titan Axis legacy. Madison. But we have to look toward a unified future. A unified future, Madison repeated. Words like poison, where people like me get written out of the story. Daniel leaned closer, his voice dipping low. Look, Madison, we understand emotions are high, but this is happening across the organization. It's not personal, it's business. Madison tilted her head, studying him. You know what's funny? Daniel, people only say it's not personal when they're the ones holding the knife. A flicker of irritation crossed his face, breaking the executive mask. He pushed the severance packet toward her, the papers rustling like dry leaves. Rebecca added gently, We do need your decision within 5 business days. Madison stared down at the folder but didn't touch it. She lifted her eyes slowly, voice low, controlled. Let me guess. If I refuse to sign, you'll say I'm being difficult, non-cooperative. Maybe call me unstable so you have a reason to classify this as for cause and wipe your hands clean. Rebecca flinched, just barely. Daniel shifted in his seat, exhaling through his nose. We don't want it to come to that. Madison stood so abruptly the chair squealed backward. I'm sure you don't. She gathered the integration packet under her arm, gave them both a level stare, and walked out without another word, out in the corridor. The door hissed closed behind her like a vault, sealing secrets inside. She took one deep breath, then another. Her legs trembled as she started toward the elevators, her mind already spinning. They thought they'd buried her in paperwork. They had no idea what was still buried in hers. Madison pushed through the front door of her apartment like she was escaping a burning building. The rain outside was relentless, pounding Seattle's streets in shimmering rivers. She stood in the entryway, soaked and shaking, the integration packet clutched in one hand like a piece of radioactive waste. Her apartment smelled of old coffee and lavender cleaning spray. She dropped her bag on the floor and kicked the door shut, leaning her forehead against the cool wood. She wanted to scream, or cry, or both. Instead, she inhaled slowly, pushed off the door, and stumbled toward the kitchen. She poured herself a glass of water but couldn't bring it to her lips. Her reflection stared back at her from the dark window over the sink, hair plastered to her face, eyes wide and haunted. I'm redundant, she whispered, testing how the words tasted in her mouth. They tasted like ashes. She set the glass down with a sharp clink. Somewhere outside, thunder rolled, shaking the window panes. Madison wiped rain from her face and turned toward the living room. Her shelves were lined with years of her life conference lanyards, old company t-shirts, dog-eared programming books, a glass plaque engraved with Titan Axis Pioneer Award. Each one felt like a tombstone. She needed answers, needed something solid to grab onto before she drowned in corporate doublespeak and polite executions. She crossed to the far wall, pulled open the slender cabinet where she kept important documents, the grown-up stuff, bills, tax returns, lease agreements, insurance policies, but also an old leather folio hidden behind a stack of Comcast bills from 2015. She froze when she saw it. It was oxblood red, edges slightly worn, embossed in gold letters that read, Titan, Axis Inc., Employment Agreement, Madison Clark. Her fingers trembled as she pulled it free. Memories hit her like a wave. She remembered the day she'd signed it. Madison, 24 years old, sitting across a folding table in a Belltown garage with neon wiring taped to the walls. The CTO at the time, Oliver King, grinning like a lunatic, pressing the folio into her hands. I didn't want your contract to be just another PDF. He'd said, I wanted it to feel real, because what you're building here is real. She'd rolled her eyes back then, called him dramatic, but now she opened the folio, heart thudding so hard it echoed in her skull. The pages were stiff, thick paper that smelled faintly of printer ink and dust. She flipped past signatures, job descriptions, IP clauses, until her eyes landed on a section titled in bold, Section 12, Change of Control Clause. She froze. Each word seemed to leap off the page. In the event that Titan Axis, Inc. is acquired, merged, or otherwise absorbed by another entity, the employee shall be entitled to accelerated vesting of all outstanding equity interests, including unexercised options, and a performance equivalent bonus in cash or stock equal to 1.8 times the valuation of such equity as determined at the time of acquisition. Should the employee be terminated without cause within 12 months of said change of control? Madison blinked, lips moving silently as she read it again. This clause shall survive any subsequent at-will policy revisions unless expressly waived by the employee in writing. She slapped the page shut, breathing shallow. Holy shit! Orion Holdings didn't mention this. Daniel, Rebecca, not a word. They'd shoved a severance packet in her face, hoping she'd roll over and vanish. But this was a grenade with the pin still in place. Her mind raced. Titan Axis acquisition price had been publicly disclosed $68.75 a share. Madison owned 132,000 shares. Some granted outright, others vesting over years. At a 1.8x multiplier, the numbers shot through her brain faster than code compiling. Over $9 million. She nearly dropped the folio. Thunder rattled the windows again, as if the universe itself was punctuating the discovery. Madison pressed the folder flat on the coffee table and flipped through every page, hunting for any signature, any amendment that might nullify the clause. Nothing. She'd never waived it. No one had even asked her to, and that meant the termination letter they'd tried to serve her was worthless. They thought she was just another name on a slide deck under redundant roles. But they'd missed the fine print. She let out a long, shaky breath. A strange calm settled over her. Not relief. Exactly. More like purpose. She stared at the leather folio. In it lay not just her contract, but her entire history, her worth, her leverage. Madison glanced toward the rain-slicked streets outside. The city lights glowed red and white, blurry through rivulets of water on the glass. She wiped a tear from her cheek and whispered, almost smiling, "Guess I'm not redundant after all." She closed the folio carefully and set it beside her on the couch. Her phone buzzed on the coffee table. An email notification. Subject: Orion Holdings. Friendly reminder. Severance decision. Due. Madison stared at it, then slowly powered off her phone. She sat back, her eyes tracing the ceiling, listening to the drum of rain. Somewhere deep inside, a new fire caught. They'd come for her future. But she still held her past, and it had teeth. Madison stood in front of the towering glass building on 3rd Avenue, clutching the oxblood folio against her chest like a shield. The rain had eased to a cold drizzle. Seattle's sky painted in smudged charcoal streaks. People rushed past, heads down, umbrellas bobbing like dark petals. Above her, bold white letters glared from the building's steel facade. Grant and Foster LLP Corporate Litigation Specialists. Inside, the lobby smelled of rain-damp suits and copier toner. The elevator chimed softly, opening on the 16th floor. When the doors slid apart, Madison stepped into a hallway that felt like a war bunker in disguise. No piped-in jazz, no fake plants. Just walls lined with law books and a reception desk manned by a woman in a navy blazer, typing as though her fingers were firing bullets. Madison Clark for Felicia Grant. The woman didn't look up. "Have a seat. She'll be right with you." Madison sat, tapping her boot heel against the polished floor. Her nerves buzzed like a live wire. Part of her felt ridiculous for being here. Part of her felt like she was about to set off an earthquake. A door swung open. Madison Clark. Madison looked up into the eyes of Felicia Grant. Felicia wore a black blazer over a dark green silk blouse. Sleeves rolled just enough to hint at forearms, honed by paperwork and courtroom battles. Her hair was jet black, swept into a loose twist, and she had the kind of presence that could hush an entire boardroom without raising her voice. "Come on in." Madison followed Felicia into an office that looked like it had survived multiple hostile takeovers. Papers were stacked in neat piles like troop formations. A whiteboard was scrawled with legal strategies in red and blue marker. The only decoration was a tiny bronze statue of Lady Justice, sword drawn, eyes blazing. Felicia gestured toward a chair. "Show me what's got Orion so eager to bury you." Madison laid the leather folio on the desk, opening it with deliberate care. Felicia pulled it closer, scanning the pages as Madison explained in a rapid tumble. "They're offering me 40 grand to sign an NDA and disappear, but they're ignoring this clause. Section 12. It says, if I'm terminated within 12 months of a merger, all my shares vest, plus a multiplier, and I never waived it." Felicia's eyes darted back and forth as she read. Her mouth twitched at one corner, like someone suppressing a grin. "Oh, Madison," she murmured. "This isn't a clause. This is a thermonuclear device." She read the paragraph aloud, her voice crisp. "This clause shall survive any subsequent at-will policy revisions unless expressly waived by the employee in writing." Felicia leaned back, tapping her pen against the leather folio. They think a new HR handbook wipes the slate clean. But that's not how it works. Contractual clauses like this survive mergers unless explicitly dissolved. They missed it, which makes them look incompetent and vulnerable. Madison swallowed hard. "But can they fight it? Say I'm for cause." Felicia's eyes glittered. "Oh, they'll try. They'll threaten you, maybe even smear you personally. That's their playbook. But this language is airtight. You've got a bulletproof contract. And from the numbers I'm seeing, they owe you more than a handshake and a severance check." Madison's voice shook. "How much?" Felicia did the math aloud, scribbling on a yellow legal pad. Orion's acquisition closed at $68.75 per share. "You have 132,000 shares, times 1.8 multiplier." She paused, lips moving silently as she calculated. "Madison, they owe you over $9 million. Madison felt the breath rush from her lungs. Her hands curled into fists on the chair arms. Felicia leaned forward, her voice dropping to a dangerous hush. "And that's before any penalties for breach of contract. If we play this right, they'll fold rather than risk the public fallout." Madison shook her head. "They're going to fight me tooth and nail." Felicia gave a sly, fox-like grin. "Good. I like a fight. And Orion Holdings absolutely does not want this to go public. They'd rather pay you than explain to the board why they're bleeding millions because someone didn't read a single page in a decade-old contract." Madison stared at her, trying to steady her pulse. "I don't want to just walk away. They tried to erase me. I want them to remember my name." Felicia's grin widened. "Then let's make sure they do." She stood, pacing behind her desk, voice turning surgical. "Here's how this goes. I draft a letter addressed to Orion's General Counsel, their Chief Legal Officer, and the entire Board of Directors. I attach the relevant sections of your original contract. I outline the payout you're owed, calculated down to the last cent. I give them 14 business days to comply, or we file suit for breach of contract, bad faith negotiations, and damages." Madison swallowed. "If they go after me personally, if they claim I took company data or start slandering me," Felicia waved her off. "Let them try. We'll hit them with retaliation claims and whistleblower protections. Besides, do you think the press will side with a multi-billion-dollar Goliath? Or the woman who built half their infrastructure and got cut loose like an old cable bill?" Madison blinked back tears. "Not of fear this time, of something sharper, stronger." Felicia capped her pen, eyes locking with Madison's. "You ready to go nuclear?" Madison felt her spine straighten. "Yes, I'm ready." Felicia slapped the folio shut, her voice cool and lethal. "Good. Let's remind Orion Holdings who they just tried to erase. Outside, the rain began to fall harder, tapping against the windows like an eager audience waiting for the curtain to rise. Madison left the office clutching her folio, heart pounding. A single thought echoing through her mind. They thought she was redundant. Now she was their biggest problem. A thick gray morning rolled over Seattle, pressing clouds low like a lid over the city. Madison sat at her kitchen table, hunched over a mug of coffee gone cold hours ago. The contract lay open before her, pages weighted down with a stapler. The words of Section 12 glowing in her mind like neon. Her email chimed. Subject: Request for immediate discussion. Orion Holdings, legal. She stared at it, heartbeat thudding like a war drum. She clicked it open, half dreading what she'd see. Madison, we are aware of your recent communications regarding your employment status and contract terms. Please refrain from any further contact with Orion employees until this matter is resolved. Regards, Kara Hall, Senior Corporate Counsel, Orion Holdings. Madison scoffed aloud. Resolved, sure. She slammed her laptop shut and pushed back from the table. By the time she arrived at Felicia's office, a firestorm had already started. Felicia was pacing behind her desk, cell phone pressed to her ear, her other hand scribbling notes so fast the pen squeaked against the paper. She didn't even glance up as Madison entered. No. Listen to me. If you mention for cause termination one more time, I'm going to file a retaliation claim so big your grandchildren will feel it. She slammed the phone down and finally met Madison's eyes. They're rattled, scared, and they're trying to build a story. Madison's chest tightened. What kind of story? Felicia sighed, rubbing her temples. The usual corporate hit job. They've started digging, calling your old colleagues, fishing for dirt they can spin. Anything to justify firing you for cause so they can void that clause. Madison clenched her jaw. So they're calling me unstable. Felicia gave a grim smile. Among other things, I've had 2 calls today from people who said Orion's legal team asked if you'd ever lost your temper at work, or taken client files home, or made threats. Madison felt something sour crawl up her throat. God, they're going to make me look like a liability. Felicia leaned forward. Let them try. We have your performance reviews, your emails, your metrics. You were a star performer right up until the merger. They're bluffing. Madison, they're hoping you'll fold. Madison swallowed hard, voice brittle. And if I don't fold, what then? Felicia's grin was savage. Then we hit them where it hurts. She dropped into her chair and flipped open her laptop. I've drafted the demand letter. It's addressed to Orion's General Counsel, the CEO, and the entire board. It references your contract clause, the exact share calculations, and demands payment in full within 14 business days. Otherwise, we file federal suit for breach of contract, bad faith, and damages. She paused, looking Madison dead in the eyes. And I've copied their outside counsel from Dresden, Halberstam and Lyle. That's a big stick. Orion's board will lose their minds if this letter lands on their desks before they've prepped for it. Madison tried to breathe evenly. Do it. Felicia hit send with one decisive click. Minutes later, Madison's phone exploded with calls. She let it ring. By late afternoon, an email popped into her inbox. The subject line alone made her stomach twist. Subject: Immediate cease and desist alleged misconduct. She opened it. Madison Clark. It has come to our attention that you may have removed proprietary materials from Titan Axis servers prior to your departure. If substantiated, this may constitute willful misconduct and a breach of your fiduciary duties. We strongly advise you to cease any further dissemination of confidential information. Failure to comply will result in legal action. Regards. Kara Hall, Senior Corporate Counsel, Orion Holdings. Madison nearly laughed. Proprietary materials. They mean my own damn code. She forwarded the email to Felicia without comment. Seconds later, her phone buzzed. Felicia's voice was dry as sandpaper. Classic scare tactic. They've got nothing, or they'd already be filing suit instead of bluffing. You hold the contract. Madison. Not them. Madison leaned against her kitchen counter, fingers pressing into the granite so hard her knuckles turned white. I don't know if I can do this. Felicia, I'm one person. They're Orion Holdings. Felicia's voice was like steel wrapped in velvet. And that's why they're scared. You're one person. And the story of one person getting screwed by a billion-dollar giant. The media loves that. The board hates it. This isn't just about money for them. It's about reputation. Madison blinked fast, her vision blurring with angry tears. They're going to drag my name through the dirt. Felicia let out a slow breath. Yes, they'll try. But remember this. They called you redundant because they thought they'd erased you. But your contract makes you radioactive. If they push this into the spotlight, it'll be all over the Wall Street Journal by next Tuesday. And I guarantee you, Madison, Orion would rather light a pile of money on fire than let this become a headline. Madison swallowed, chest heaving. I don't want hush money. I want them to remember who the hell I am. Felicia's eyes gleamed. Good, because we're not backing down. Late that night, as rain rattled the window like fingernails, Madison scrolled through message after message from former colleagues. Hey, just a heads up. Orion Legal called me asking if you'd ever been unstable. I told them to go screw themselves. Orion's digging. Madison, watch your back. They're trying to paint you as a security risk. Be careful. Madison tossed her phone onto the couch and stared at the ceiling, heart hammering. She was terrified. But beneath the fear, something sharp and bright pulsed through her veins. Not revenge, justice. She picked up the contract again, running her fingers over the gold-embossed letters like reading Braille. Orion wanted her quiet, invisible. But she'd been building invisible things her whole career. Infrastructure, code. Systems nobody saw until the day they broke. Now she was the system they'd broken, and she was about to show them how dangerous invisible things could be. Madison barely slept. She drifted in and out of shallow dreams where fluorescent lights flickered above conference tables and faceless suits whispered her name like a curse. By morning, the sky over Seattle had cleared into a pale, washed-out blue. She sat at her kitchen table, hair in a messy bun, wearing the same Titan's Axis hoodie she'd lived in for days. Her laptop was open, email window pulsing with new messages. She exhaled slowly, clicked open the latest one. Subject: Urgent request to connect. Craig Edgerton, EVP Risk Management, Orion Holdings. Craig. That name sent a ripple of disgust down her spine. She'd seen him once at a company town hall, gleaming smile, perfect hair. The kind of man who probably high-fived himself in the mirror every morning. The email read like corporate perfume suite, overbearing, trying too hard to cover the stench beneath. Madison. Hope you're doing well. I'd love to discuss your concerns in a constructive way. It's important to us that we find a mutually beneficial resolution without unnecessary escalation. Let me know when you're free today. Best. Craig Edgerton, she snorted, leaning back in her chair. Mutually beneficial. My ass. Her phone buzzed a minute later. Unknown number. She let it ring, then rang again. And again. On the fourth call, she answered, voice flat. Madison Clark. Craig's voice oozed through the line. Madison, I'm so glad you picked up. Listen, I know things have been tense. Madison said nothing. Craig kept going, words tumbling out in a practiced cadence. We really want to resolve this amicably. I'm authorized to offer you a severance enhancement of, let me confirm, yes, $200,000, assuming you'll sign a full release and NDA. Madison blinked, then laughed so sharply it scraped the air. That's cute, Craig stammered. I'm sorry. 200,000. That's about 2% of what you owe me. You know that, right? Madison, I understand you're upset. I'm not upset, she interrupted. I'm amused. You people didn't even read your own paperwork before cutting me loose. And now you're waving monopoly money like I'm too dumb to notice. Craig's voice tightened, dropping the friendly tone. Madison, litigation is expensive. It's public. No one wins in that scenario. She could practically hear the sweat forming on his temples. Tell that to your board, she shot back. My lawyer's name is Felicia Grant. You should have her on speed dial. She hung up. No flourish, no mic drop, just quiet power. She sat there, feeling her pulse slow into something steady. Minutes later, her phone buzzed again. A voicemail this time. Hi, Madison, this is Craig. Again. Please, let's talk before this escalates further. We're willing to be flexible. She deleted it without listening to the rest. She emailed Felicia. Subject Craig called. Offered the $200K. I told him to shove it. Felicia responded within 5 minutes. Good. Let them sweat. That night, Madison imagined the chaos unfolding behind Orion's steel and glass facade. PowerPoints with her name in the title. Charts labeled Urgent Liability Exposure. Madison Clark. A dozen execs staring at one another, wondering how a single woman could throw a billion-dollar machine into panic. She could almost see Craig, sleeves rolled up, forehead beaded with sweat, asking his legal team, can she really enforce this clause? And some junior lawyer pointing out, with trembling fingers, that yes, she absolutely could. The following day, a plain manila envelope arrived at Madison's door. No postage, hand-delivered. She sliced it open with the edge of a butter knife. Inside, 9 pages of letterhead screamed corporate threat. Ms. Clark. It has come to Orion's attention that you may have violated confidentiality provisions and removed proprietary materials prior to your termination. If substantiated, these actions would constitute willful misconduct, potentially invalidating any contractual claims you believe to possess. Orion reserves the right to pursue legal remedies, including counterclaims for breach of fiduciary duty and reputational harm. Madison stared at the letter, her chest tightening. For a moment, the room seemed to tilt. Then her phone buzzed. Felicia. They blinked. Felicia said, not bothering with a hello. This letter is bluff and bluster. If they had real evidence, we'd already be staring down a TRO or an emergency injunction. They're trying to scare you. Madison sank into a chair. But what if they dig up something? Something stupid. I forgot I did. Felicia's tone was sharp as glass. They'd have led with specifics if they had them. This is a fishing expedition. Stay silent. Let me do the talking. Madison nodded, gripping the phone. Felicia went on, voice dropping to something darkly amused. Besides, my letter landed. Orion's board is holding emergency meetings. And I've heard whispers that Craig might be on the chopping block if this goes sideways. Madison blinked. Already, Felicia's laugh was low and lethal. Oh yeah, the sharks smell blood. And right now, you're not the one bleeding. Madison felt a jolt of adrenaline. For the first time in weeks, she wasn't drowning. She was swimming. Craig could offer hush money. Orion could send scary letters. But Madison wasn't going away. She stared at the contract lying on her table. It was more than a piece of paper. It was a weapon, and she was done being quiet. Sunlight streamed across Madison's apartment the next morning, turning the hardwood floors into warm, golden stripes. She sat at the kitchen table, her cracked Titan Axis mug steaming in front of her, eyes fixed on the laptop screen. Her inbox flashed with an incoming call. Felicia's name. She took a deep breath and clicked, accept. Felicia appeared on the screen, hair tied back, wearing that same dark green silk blouse, looking as sharp as ever. But today, there was a light in her eyes that hadn't been there before. "It's done," Felicia said. No preamble, no hesitation. Madison blinked. Felicia leaned forward, her voice dropping to an almost conspiratorial hush. Orion Holdings folded entirely. They've agreed to the full payout, every dollar. Madison's mouth fell open. "You're serious?" Felicia cracked a grin. "They wired the funds this morning. $9.8 million, plus interest calculated from the merger date. No NDA, no hush clause, no for cause nonsense. Clean transfer." Madison felt her vision blur. Her breath hitched. She clamped a hand over her mouth, trying to steady herself. Felicia kept talking, voice calm but edged with triumph. "I got word there was a board meeting last night. Someone finally asked the magic question, what happens if this becomes a headline? They did the math. Shareholder lawsuits, PR disasters, and Randall, your buddy who swung the axe, well, rumor is he's been terminated effective immediately for failure of due diligence." Madison's voice came out shaky. "Daniel's gone." Felicia nodded. "Gone." Sacrificial lamb. The board needed a fall guy. They're blaming him for missing your clause in the due diligence process. He's probably lawyering up as we speak. Madison sat back in her chair, staring at nothing. $9.8 million. A figure so big it felt fictional, like numbers on a scoreboard. "I don't even know what to do next," she whispered. Felicia tilted her head. "You do whatever the hell you want. Take time off, travel, start your own company, or just sleep in for a week. You earned it." Madison blinked rapidly, still fighting the surge of emotion flooding her chest. "Did they say anything in the settlement letter?" Felicia pulled a piece of paper from a folder, reading aloud, her tone dry and mocking. "Orion Holdings recognizes Ms. Madison Clark's significant contributions to the legacy Titan Axis systems and acknowledges the validity and enforceability of Section 12 of her employment contract." She paused, then smirked. They basically admitted they screwed up. Without saying the words, Madison laughed, a sharp, slightly hysterical sound. "They tried to erase me, and now they're paying me to remember." Felicia nodded solemnly. "Exactly. And let me tell you, Madison, they will never forget your name. Not after this." A soft beep indicated Felicia was getting another call. She gave Madison a little salute. "I have to run. But enjoy this, okay? You earned it the hard way." The call ended. Madison sat motionless. The apartment seemed to expand around her, like the walls were giving her space to breathe for the first time in weeks. She clicked into her bank portal. There it was. Incoming wire transfer. Orion Holdings settlement. 9-812, 550-64. Her fingers hovered above the trackpad, tracing the numbers as though they might disappear. No confetti. No trumpets. Just plain text on a pale blue screen. She let out a shaky laugh. Across the room, the Titan Axis hoodie was draped over a chair. She stared at the faded logo, feeling a pang of something complicated. Pride, sorrow, rage, vindication. She picked it up, smoothing the worn fabric. For a second, she was back in the Belltown garage, 24 years old, running cables along exposed brick walls. Oliver King's voice echoing in her ears. "Build the future, or get run over by it." She smiled. "I built the future," she murmured, "and I'm not the one getting run over." Her phone buzzed with a new message. From Jerome, the quiet engineer who'd never dared look her in the eye the day she'd packed her box. "Hey, just wanted you to know everyone's talking. Word is Daniel's out. Board found out he fired you without checking your file. People are calling you a legend." Drinks on me if you ever want to gloat." Madison felt warmth spread through her chest. Legend. Not redundant. Legend. She typed back one word. Thanks. Then she turned off her phone, dropped it onto the couch beside her, and pulled her knees up to her chest. Outside, Seattle pulsed on ferries cutting through gray water, cars humming along rain-slick streets, neon signs flickering in bar windows. Inside, Madison closed her eyes, exhaled slowly, and felt something settle in her bones. Not relief, not triumph, just peace. A quiet certainty that they'd tried to erase her. And instead, she'd written herself into the margins of their history in gold ink. And maybe, just maybe, she was finally free. Madison leaned her forehead against the cool glass of her window, watching the city breathe beneath her. Neon signs flickered in puddles below, 1,000 reflections dancing on wet pavement. Her coffee had gone cold again, but she didn't care. She stared into the night and thought about all she'd survived. And all she'd learned, she realized life wasn't just a series of contracts and bullet points on a resume. It was the fine print, the quiet sentences buried deep, the things you write down because you believe someone should remember who you were. And sometimes, those forgotten words come roaring back to save you. She thought about all the people who'd whispered to her that she was being difficult, about the polished smiles that told her this was just business, about the corporate machinery that tried to convince her she was disposable. She whispered into the dark, as though telling secrets to the rain. Never sign away your past without reading the fine print. Because those few sentences in her contract had been worth more than any loyalty speech or company hoodie. They were the truth of her value, locked away until she needed them most. She thought about how easily Orion Holdings had tried to wipe her name off a slide deck. How quickly people tried to turn silence into a transaction. She swallowed hard. Contracts outlive people, and sometimes save them. And she remembered Felicia's words echoing in her mind. They called you redundant because they thought they'd erased you, but your story wasn't over until you decided it was. Madison felt the corners of her mouth curve into a small, real smile. Silence can be powerful, but speaking up is even more powerful. Because the world is full of giant corporations who bank on the idea that people will stay quiet. That fear will keep you in line, that nobody will remember your name. But Madison knew better now. If there's one thing she wished she could tell anyone listening, it was this. If you've ever felt invisible or erased, remember that your story isn't finished. You are not just a name on a spreadsheet. You are the fine print that can change everything. She closed her eyes, letting the quiet stretch around her like a blanket. Outside, the rain began to fall again, gentle and steady. Madison whispered one last truth into the silence. They thought they could erase me, but I wrote myself back into the story.